This is your Classical Break, your daily dose of classical music. I'm Tyler Alderson, and today we'll be listening to Gabriel Grovlez' L'Almanach aux Images, a set of 8 miniatures for solo piano. Grovlez was educated at the Paris Conservatoire around the turn of the 20th century, and spent much of his professional life as a well-respected conductor, leading concerts across Europe and the US, and serving as the music director of the Paris Opera for over 20 years. He conducted many prominent premieres of works by Ravel, Fauré, and other well-known composers of his day, but his own compositions haven't gotten nearly as much attention. They do get some play as teaching pieces. You'll find them on a lot of students' recitals, but usually those are excerpts, maybe 2 or 3 of these miniatures, rather than the whole thing, and you don't hear a lot of his other pieces. It's too bad, because Grovlez' music shows a lot of the same characteristics as that of his more celebrated fellow Parisians. It's very experiential. Like Debussy, he was more concerned with the act of listening itself than trying to make people think or analyze his compositional techniques. Each of these 8 pieces has a distinctive mood, and even without knowing the poems they were based on, you'll get a sense of what each one is about. He also looked beyond strict tonality, and like many around him, he looked both forwards and backwards for that inspiration. As the head of the Paris Opera, he revived many works by early opera composers from the Baroque era, and had an interest in even earlier music from the Renaissance and the Middle Ages. These predated the standard tonality practiced in classical music, so the sounds that he was using were both old, harkening back many, many centuries, and new, pushing the boundaries of the more conservative status quo. He didn't quite go as far in that direction as his contemporaries Ravel and Debussy, for example, did, which might be one of the reasons why he's remembered less than those two. But his work fits quite nicely in with theirs, and holds up well against any of his contemporaries. These miniatures show the degree to which music mixed with other arts, especially the world of poetry. Many composers have been inspired by poems, most obviously when they decide to set them to music, but also when they use the poems as a jumping-off point for their compositional ideas. We heard that a couple weeks ago in the episodes on Debussy's preludes, many of which were inspired by poetry, or even last Friday's episode on Grieg's elegiac melodies. These pieces are all based off poems by a French writer named Tristan Klingsor. And if that sounds like a weird name, it's because it's a made-up pen name. And bringing it back around, he took that pen name from 2 Wagner operas, Tristan from Tristan and Isolde, and Klingsor from the main villain in Parsifal. So it's music inspired by a poet who was inspired by music, which is a nice symbiosis. And in fact, Klingsor was part of an avant-garde group of artists in Paris that included composers, writers, painters, and musicians. And while Grovlez wasn't a member himself, he was personally and professionally linked with many in the group, like Tristan Klingsor. As I mentioned before, each of the 8 miniatures within the almanach has its own character. The first one, for example, is titled The Marionettes, and features a meandering, playful melody that brings to mind those little puppets on a string. Contrast that with the final piece, The Little Litanies of Jesus, contemplative and reverent, with a touch of medieval harmonies that bring maybe Gregorian chant to mind. Here's Peter Bradley Fulgoni with Gabriel Grovlez' L'Almanach aux Images. That last one, the Little Litanies of Jesus, is really the only one from Grovlez that's actually gotten some popularity. It's certainly his most popular piece. And I think it holds up really well against similar pieces from Debussy, Ravel, Fauré, all of his contemporaries. Grovlez is certainly overlooked, but he has his own charms. Thanks to Peter Bradley Fulgoni for putting that up on museopen.org. And thank you for listening. If you have the chance, please rate and review this podcast wherever it is that you're getting it. I'm Tyler Alderson, and tomorrow for your classical break, we'll be listening to another great composer for the piano, Chopin. I'll see you then.